There is a mansion on East Avenue in Rochester, New York, that contains one of the strangest contradictions in American history. The building stands at 900 East Avenue, wrapped in Colonial Revival elegance and surrounded by gardens that still bloom according to plans drawn in 1902. 35,000 square feet, 50 rooms, reinforced concrete beneath decorative craftsmanship. When it was completed in 1905, it was the largest private residence in the city, built by a man who would live there alone for 27 years. George Eastman, the founder of Eastman Kodak Company, constructed this palace with a fortune earned by teaching the world to capture smiles. He did not smile himself until he was 40 years old. He built a mansion designed for gatherings that would never include his own children. He created technology that democratized memory for millions while living in meticulous isolation. He gave away over $100 million during his lifetime and maintained absolute authority over every penny until the morning he decided authority no longer mattered. On March 14, 1932, in a bedroom on the second floor, he left a note containing 6 words, then ended the contradiction with a single gunshot. This is the story of the Eastman Mansion, where America learned to say cheese, and one man learned he could not. Before we step through the doors of this remarkable mansion, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and if you're fascinated by the untold stories of the men who invented modern America, subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. Now, let's go back to 1902, when East Avenue was about to change forever. In 1902, East Avenue in Rochester was where fortunes went to be displayed. The street stretched east from downtown through a corridor of mansions built by men who had turned Western New York into an industrial empire. These were not the estates of inherited wealth. They were monuments to the American capacity for making money from nothing, for transforming flour mills and optical instruments and ready-made clothing into fortunes large enough to require landscaped grounds for proper exhibition. The transformation had begun decades earlier. During the Civil War era, Rochester had earned the nickname Flour City for its position as a milling center, processing grain shipped down from the Genesee Valley in quantities that made the city wealthy. By the 1860s, that wealth needed somewhere to live. The Third Ward Historic District, Rochester's original residential area for the elite, had filled to capacity. Millers, bankers, and corporation executives seeking more spacious surroundings made East Avenue the address. There they erected imposing mansions in landscaped settings with greenhouses, carriage houses, stables, and outbuildings. The continuation of East Avenue's high property values was assured in 1861 when the University of Rochester moved to nearby University Avenue, bringing institutional prestige to the neighborhood. By the turn of the century, historian Blake McKelvey would refer to East Avenue as the Avenue of Presidents, and with good reason. The Rochester City Directories for 1903 and 1904 showed that the city's elite, many company presidents among them, lived on East Avenue. The avenue adapted to each era. Horse races along the boulevard turned into races between horse and automobile, then between automobile and automobile. The street needed resurfacing to accommodate the new mode of transportation. George Eastman served on the committee to recommend pavement for the avenue. The business district portion was widened. Where nurseries had once grown flowers, elaborate private gardens now bloomed behind iron gates. By 1902, wealth from new industries was building mansions up and down East Avenue. Kodak profits, Bausch and Lomb Optical Company profits. Profits from Hickey Freeman, Adler Brothers, Steinbloch, Society brand coats and suits. Revenue from Sibley, Lindsay, and Kerr's department store. The avenue had become a catalog of American manufacturing success, each mansion a monument to a different way of turning machinery and labor into money. But one parcel remained. The last 8.5 acres of the Marvin Culver farm sat at 900 East Avenue, the final agricultural holdout on a street that had left agriculture behind. The land had been farmland since before Rochester became a city. In 1902, it was simply empty space, waiting for the man who would build the avenue's grandest mansion. That man had started with nothing. George Eastman was born into a family that would teach him 2 lessons. Money could disappear overnight, and precision was the only protection against chaos. He entered the world on July 12, 1854, in the village of Waterville, New York, some 20 miles southwest of Utica. His father, George Washington Eastman, ran Eastman's Commercial College in Rochester, teaching bookkeeping and penmanship to young men seeking business skills. The family owned a small farm in Waterville where George spent his early years. The youngest of 3 children, he had 2 older sisters, Ellen Maria and Katie. In 1860, when George was 5, the family moved to Rochester so his father could devote more energy to the business college. 2 years later, tragedy struck. George Washington Eastman died suddenly of what records describe as a brain disorder. George was 8 years old. The college failed. The family's financial foundation collapsed. George Eastman's mother, Maria Kilburn Eastman, was left nearly penniless with 3 children to support. She took in boarders to generate income, converting their home into a rooming house that provided just enough money to survive. The family learned what poverty meant. In 1870, when George was 15, his sister Katie died. She had suffered from polio. The family could not afford the kind of care that might have made her final years more comfortable. George left school at 14. He had no choice. The family needed income. His first job, as a messenger boy with an insurance firm, paid $3 per week. He worked from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, 6 days a week. Within a year, he found work as an office boy at another insurance company. The pay was marginally better. In the evenings, he studied accounting, teaching himself the skills his father had once taught others. His diligence paid off. In 1874, at age 20, he was hired as a junior clerk at the Rochester Savings Bank. The position offered stability, a salary, and the possibility of advancement. It also offered something more important: time to think about a future beyond mere survival. Eastman kept meticulous records. From his first $3 paycheck, he maintained ledger books documenting every penny earned and every penny spent. He would keep these books his entire life. The childhood that had taught him money could vanish had produced an adult who would never stop counting. In 1877, a colleague at the bank suggested that Eastman take a camera on an upcoming vacation to Santo Domingo. The idea intrigued him. Eastman, at 23, had never traveled. He purchased the photographic equipment necessary for the trip. The outfit was enormous, heavy, and expensive. It required a large camera, a strong tripod, a plate holder, a dark tent, chemicals, a water container, and heavy glass plates. The total cost represented a significant portion of his savings. He never took the trip. Instead, he became obsessed with the equipment itself. Photography in the 1870s was a cumbersome process accessible only to professionals or wealthy amateurs willing to haul equipment and master complex chemical procedures. Eastman began experimenting with ways to simplify the process. He read British journals describing dry plate photography, a method that eliminated some of the complexity. In his mother's kitchen, he worked late into the night, coating glass plates with gelatin and photographic chemicals. In 1879, he developed a machine for mass-producing photographic plates. He patented the device in England, then received an American patent in 1880. He sold the British patent rights and used the proceeds to open a small shop in Rochester manufacturing photographic plates. In 1881, he founded the Eastman Dry Plate Company with Henry Strong, a local buggy whip manufacturer who provided financial backing. Strong became president. Eastman served as treasurer but handled most executive functions. The company succeeded, but Eastman wanted more. Glass plates were heavy and fragile. He began experimenting with paper as a base for photographic emulsion. By 1885, working with camera inventor William Hall Walker, he had developed a roll holder that could fit existing cameras and use flexible film wound on spools. Photography was about to become portable. In 1888, Eastman patented and released the Kodak camera. The name meant nothing. He invented it, believing products should have their own identity free from association with anything else. The letter K, he said, seemed strong and incisive. The camera was a simple handheld box containing a 100-exposure roll of film. It sold for $25. The company's slogan was direct: "You press the button, we do the rest." The concept revolutionized photography. After taking 100 pictures, the customer mailed the entire camera back to Rochester, along with $10. The company developed the film, made prints, reloaded the camera, and returned everything to the customer. For the first time, photography required no technical knowledge. Anyone could capture images. In 1889, Eastman hired chemist Henry Reichenbach to develop a transparent, flexible film that would work even better than paper-based rolls. Thomas Edison adapted this film for use in the motion picture camera he was developing. Eastman's innovation became the foundation for cinema. In 1892, Eastman reorganized the business as the Eastman Kodak Company. In 1900, the company introduced the Brownie camera, priced at $1 and marketed to children. By 1896, Kodak had become the leading supplier of film stock internationally. By 1913, the market value of all Kodak stock reached $175 million, making George Eastman one of the wealthiest men in America. He never married. When asked why, he cited being too busy and too poor when younger. By the time he had accumulated wealth, he claimed, the pattern was set. He lived with his mother Maria, devoting himself to her comfort with the same intensity he applied to his business. She was the central person in his life. Everything he built with her in mind. Eastman was not building a photography business. He was building a fortress against the poverty that had defined his childhood. Every dollar represented security. Every patent represented mastery. Every innovation represented independence from the kind of disaster that had killed his father and left his family destitute. By 1902, Eastman had accumulated enough wealth to insulate himself from every disaster. Except, it would turn out, from himself. With fortune secured, he turned his attention to building something his mother could live in with the comfort she had been denied. George Eastman chose to build his mansion out of reinforced concrete because wood could burn. In 1902, he purchased the last 8.5 acres of the Marvin Culver farm on East Avenue for an undisclosed sum. The parcel was the final piece of agricultural land on Rochester's most prestigious street. Eastman intended to eliminate that agricultural past completely. He hired J. Foster Warner, a local Rochester architect born in 1859, to design the structure. Warner was competent, but not famous. For interior design, Eastman wanted the best. He retained William Rutherford Mead of McKim Mead White, the prestigious New York firm that had worked on Andrew Carnegie's mansion and portions of the White House. For landscape design, he hired Stephen DeForest, who would transform the acreage into something that functioned as both working farm and aesthetic statement. Warner based the mansion's design on the Root House in Buffalo, but adapted the style to reflect Eastman's preferences for permanence and modernity. The exterior would be Colonial Revival with elements of Georgian, Dutch, and Greek architecture. The interior would incorporate Roman, Gothic, and Tudor influences. The eclecticism was common for wealthy homes of the period. What was uncommon was the structural material. Eastman insisted on fireproof concrete construction. Wood could burn. Stone required skilled masons and extended construction time. Concrete offered structural strength and the ability to build quickly. The decision reflected Eastman's engineering mindset. He was not building for beauty alone. He was building to survive. The mansion would encompass 35,000 square feet across 3 stories, 50 rooms. The ground floor would include a grand entrance hall, dining room, billiard room, library, great hall, and living room, all accessible from a 2-story conservatory that would serve as the home's central space. The second floor would house bedrooms, including a suite for his mother. The third floor would contain a screening room, workshop, and living quarters for household staff. Beneath the decorative craftsmanship, Eastman installed technology. An electrical generator provided power independent of the city grid. An internal telephone system connected 21 stations throughout the house, allowing communication between rooms without shouting or walking. A built-in vacuum cleaning system eliminated the need for portable equipment. A central clock network synchronized time in every room. An elevator moved between floors. These were not luxuries. They were tools of independence. Eastman was involved in every aspect of construction, paying close attention to detail and requiring the use of high-quality materials. He visited the site frequently, inspecting work and demanding corrections when results did not meet his specifications. William Rutherford Mead traveled from New York multiple times to oversee interior finishes. Nothing was left to chance. The grounds received equal attention. DeForest designed 8 separate gardens, each serving a different function. The Italianate Terrace Garden, the oldest and most formal, featured 23 beds containing more than 90 varieties of plants, arranged with formal symmetry in the beds but informal variety in the plantings themselves, reflecting Eastman's need for order combined with his love of color. Adjacent areas would include a library garden for cut flowers, a rock garden providing a hidden picturesque destination, and eventually a west garden designed by architect Claude Bragdon, modeled after an English walled garden at Hestercombe House in Somerset. The estate would include working farm elements, a dairy, an orchard, a berry patch, a poultry yard, a tool shed, a barn, stables, livestock pastures, and 5 greenhouses. The combination created an urban estate that functioned as both elegant residence and productive farm. Fresh eggs, milk, and produce would come from the grounds. Flowers for the house would be cut from Eastman's own gardens. Self-sufficiency mattered. The total cost of initial construction was $335,000, equivalent to approximately $9 million today. Some sources place the total project cost, including landscaping and outbuildings, at $500,000. For 1905, this was an extraordinary sum to invest in a private residence. Eastman paid in cash. The mansion was completed in October 1905. Eastman celebrated with a gala. Guests walked through rooms decorated with custom-made furniture, silk draperies, and oriental carpets. They admired the conservatory's marble columns and glass ceiling. They noted the technological innovations. They understood they were seeing the largest and most modern private residence in Rochester. What they did not see was the purpose. Eastman had not built a house. He had built a system of precision. Every room could be reached by telephone. Every clock showed the same time. Every light operated on independent power. Every surface could be cleaned by machines built into the walls. The structure could survive fire. It could function without outside assistance. It could operate according to schedules and specifications determined entirely by its owner. Eastman had built a house that could survive anything, even him. What he built for protection became, almost immediately, a stage. Every morning, the organ began at 7. The sound came from 9 separate divisions of pipes installed in chambers surrounding the conservatory. 132 ranks of pipes, 4 keyboards, a percussion section, a mechanism that could play itself using paper rolls. The Aeolian pipe organ Opus 1416, completed in 1917 with 6,175 pipes, designed to sound like a modern orchestra rather than a traditional organ. George Eastman had commissioned it as the centerpiece of his home, quite literally making the house itself an instrument. Each morning, a paid organist arrived before 7, climbed to the console, and began playing. The music filled the conservatory where Eastman took breakfast. The 2-story space with its marble columns and glass ceiling became a concert hall. Eastman sat reading newspapers or discussing business with associates, while organ music echoed off tile and stone. When his mother was alive, she sometimes joined him. After her death in 1907, he usually sat alone. The mansion operated with the precision of the Kodak factories. Household staff maintained the 50 rooms, tended the gardens, managed the livestock, and ensured the technology functioned properly. The 3rd floor housed servants' quarters. The exact number of staff is not documented, but a residence of this scale required cooks, housekeepers, gardeners, stable hands, farm workers, and maintenance personnel. The operation was substantial. Despite the size and staffing, the house served primarily one function: entertaining. Eastman used the mansion to host business associates, employees, visiting dignitaries, and friends. Historian Blake McKelvey described it as, quote, 3. After its completion, the mansion, with its pipe organ, became the center of Rochester's rich musical life. The contradiction was immediate. Eastman was painfully shy. He avoided public events honoring him. He refused most interviews. He disliked crowds and often went unrecognized in his own hometown despite being Rochester's wealthiest resident. Yet he filled his mansion with guests. He held lavish parties. He invited employees to concerts. He transformed his private residence into a public venue. The guest list read like a catalog of American achievement. Thomas Edison visited to demonstrate film technologies. General John J. Pershing attended receptions. The chiefs of General Electric and RCA came to discuss business. Arthur Oakes, publisher of the New York Times, toured the gardens. 4 United States presidents corresponded with Eastman, and evidence suggests at least some visited the mansion. Photographers Edward Steichen and Alfred Stieglitz examined Eastman's camera collection. Explorers Osa and Martin Johnson shared stories of their expeditions. Eastman maintained a 12-year correspondence with Booker T. Washington, the founder of Tuskegee Institute. Washington visited Rochester multiple times, and while direct evidence of mansion visits is limited, the depth of their relationship and Eastman's hosting patterns suggest Washington was entertained there. The irony would become clear later. The most famous event occurred on July 30th, 1928. Eastman invited an elite group to Rochester for a garden party that would make headlines worldwide. The guest list included Thomas Edison, General Pershing, the heads of General Electric and RCA, and media moguls, including the publisher of the New York Times. The day began with breakfast at a nearby country club. Then the guests were driven to Eastman's mansion, where they were seated in a dimly lit drawing room with chairs arranged before 2 screens. Eastman demonstrated Kodacolor, the first practical color motion picture film. The audience watched footage shot in vivid color that had previously been impossible to capture on film. The announcement revolutionized cinema. The demonstration at Eastman's mansion became the official launch of color film technology. Throughout this period of entertaining, one presence dominated the mansion until 1907, Maria Kilburn Eastman, George's mother. He had built the house for her. She lived there from 1905 until her death on June 16, 1907. When she died, Eastman cried all day. Friends later reported that for the first time in his life, he could not contain his emotions. The mansion he had built to provide her comfort had given her only 2 years of it. After Maria's death, a woman named Josephine Dickman became a frequent presence at the mansion. She was the widow of George Dickman, who had headed Kodak's London office. After her husband's death, Eastman helped her return to the United States and establish herself in Boston. They developed a close platonic friendship that lasted until Eastman's death. She served as hostess at many mansion events. She traveled with Eastman to his Oak Lodge property in North Carolina. She introduced him to arts and culture during their time together in Boston. Eastman photographed Josephine constantly. He captured her at the billiard table, at the archery range, on picnics, in canoes, in the woods, on fishing expeditions. His biographer Elizabeth Brayer noted, considering his shyness, perhaps all this photographing was a way of making love without making love. The relationship defined Eastman's capacity for intimacy, close, devoted, documented, and ultimately incomplete. The mansion housed only memories where children might have played. Eastman filled the rooms with guests but remained essentially alone. He created technology that captured joy but could not experience joy himself. He built 50 rooms and lived in the space between them. The house had become exactly what he built it to be, a magnificent shell protecting something that could not be protected. But the organ in the conservatory was not decoration. George Eastman made an industry of capturing smiles, but by his own admission, he never smiled until he was 40 years old. In 1917, he told an associate, quote 5 by then, Kodak's advertising featured families smiling at cameras, children grinning for brownie snapshots, and people preserving happy moments on film. The company had built an empire on the idea that life's joyful moments deserved preservation. The man who made it possible had spent 4 decades without expressing joy visibly. What filled the space where joy might have lived was music. A friend once wrote that, quote 6 the observation was accurate. In 1925, Eastman took a culture trip to New York City. In 6 days, he attended 12 operas and plays. He visited the Morgan Library, the Metropolitan Museum, and the Frick Museum. He saw 2 movies. In his own summary of the trip, he wrote, quote 7 for Eastman, attending 12 performances in 6 days constituted leisure. He described listening to music as underscore, quote underscore 8 underscore. At the mansion, the Aeolian pipe organ served as his primary instrument. Opus 1416, completed in 1917, represented the pinnacle of residential organ construction. The 132 ranks of pipes included 49 in the string family, allowing the instrument to mimic orchestral sounds rather than traditional organ voices. The 4 keyboards, pedal board, 4 volume control pedals, crescendo pedal, and percussion section gave the organist complete command over sound. The pipes were installed in 9 separate divisions surrounding the 2-story conservatory. When played, the entire house resonated. Eastman ate breakfast while the music filled the space. He described it as having no residual bad effects. Unlike overindulgence in other things, music could be consumed without consequence. There was no such thing as too much. The organ represented more than appreciation for music. It represented Eastman's need to direct his environment completely. He did not attend concerts, he brought concerts to himself. He did not rely on performers' schedules. He hired an organist who played when Eastman wanted music. The organ could also play itself using paper rolls, allowing Eastman to have music even when the organist was unavailable. Even art submitted to his specifications. Eastman never married. He surrounded himself with women but never proposed to any of them. He enjoyed their company, shared their interests in gardening and cooking, traveled with them, entertained them at his mansion. But he maintained boundaries that could not be crossed. When asked why he never married, he cited being too busy and too poor when younger. The explanation was incomplete. By the time he had accumulated wealth, he had authority. Marriage would have required sharing that authority. The mansion reflected this pattern. It was built for entertaining, but designed for solitude. The 50 rooms could accommodate dozens of guests, but most nights Eastman occupied them alone. The 3rd floor contained staff quarters, but Eastman kept his distance from the servants who maintained his home. The conservatory was designed for gatherings, but Eastman often sat there by himself, listening to organ music and reading newspapers while his breakfast grew cold. Photography served a similar function. Eastman was rarely photographed himself and disliked being the subject of images, but he photographed constantly, particularly Josephine Dickman. The camera created distance. It allowed observation without participation. It preserved moments without requiring presence within them. Eastman could capture life without living it. His hobbies extended this pattern. He took African safaris but approached them with methodical preparation rather than spontaneous adventure. On one expedition, he stood filming a charging rhinoceros with a hand-cranked movie camera. The animal charged directly at him. Eastman continued filming, then simply sidestepped and actually brushed the rhino as it passed. As the animal began a second charge, Eastman, still methodically filming, the terrified hunter guide accompanying him, shot the creature dead just a few paces from his client. Eastman's first concern was whether he had captured the footage. He bicycled across Europe multiple times, but traveled on carefully planned routes with detailed itineraries. He bicycled to work in Rochester, even during harsh winters, but followed the same path each day. Adventure for Eastman meant executing plans in exotic locations, not surrendering to unpredictability. In 1919, he proved that precision extended even to architecture itself. Eastman decided the conservatory in his mansion was the wrong shape. He wanted it oblong rather than square. Most people would accept the constraint. Eastman hired architect William G. Kaelber to solve the problem. Kaelber's solution was extraordinary. He drew up plans to cut the house in 2 and move the rear section 9 feet 4 inches to the north. The method involved horizontal hydraulic jacks positioned on railroad ties fitted with special wheels and tracks. The rear portion of the mansion, thousands of square feet of concrete structure, would be physically shifted while the front section remained stationary. The plan was executed successfully. Workers cut through the concrete, installed the jack system, and moved half of Eastman's mansion nearly 10 feet. The conservatory became oblong. The cost was never documented because cost was irrelevant. Eastman wanted the space modified. The modification happened. The house moving demonstrated what unlimited wealth combined with absolute determination could accomplish. Most people adjust to their homes. Eastman adjusted his home. The mansion would cost whatever it took to be perfect. No compromise. No acceptance of flaws. No acknowledgement that some things cannot be changed. What Eastman could not photograph, could not preserve in chemical emulsion, was whatever he was protecting himself from, The fortress he built against chaos could not protect against the chaos within the fortress. The organ played every morning. The gardens bloomed on schedule. The clocks showed synchronized time. The house functioned according to specifications. None of it addressed what happened in the spaces between the organ notes. By the 1920s, Kodak had made Eastman one of the wealthiest men in America. The mansion became his laboratory for what money could accomplish when directed by uncompromising will. George Eastman gave away $100 million during his lifetime and did everything possible to ensure no one knew about it. In 1909, he donated $1 million to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The gift was anonymous. MIT reported the donor as Mr. Smith. Eastman derived great pleasure from the speculation that followed. Newspapers investigated, society figures debated. Students wrote songs about the mysterious benefactor. No one discovered the truth. The charade continued for years. In 1918, Eastman met with MIT President Richard McLaurin to discuss additional support. McLaurin needed funding for new buildings and programs. Eastman asked what sum was required. McLaurin replied that $2.5 million would transform the institution. Eastman immediately agreed to provide it, on one condition: the gift must remain anonymous. McLaurin accepted, but faced a practical problem. The term anonymous giver was too clumsy for everyday use. He settled on Mr. Smith as a pseudonym and gave the public two small clues. Mr. Smith did not live in Massachusetts, and he had never attended MIT. The mystery deepened. In 1918, seeing that the anonymous arrangement was exhausting McLaurin, Eastman agreed to a compromise. He would reveal himself as Mr. Smith at the annual alumni dinner on January 10, 1920. The revelation that Mr. Smith was George Eastman, the famous recluse of Rochester, made front-page news. McLaurin did not live to enjoy it. Exhausted from raising $4 million in matching funds to accompany Eastman's gift, he had contracted pneumonia in December 1919. He died a week later at age 50. His speech revealing Eastman's identity had to be read by others. The publicity did not slow Eastman's giving. On December 10, 1924, he held a press conference to announce that he was retiring from active management of Kodak and would donate the majority of his fortune rather than leave it to be distributed after his death. His reasoning was direct. _quote_12. Eastman believed strongly that donors should give while living and able to guide the application of their money. He once famously declared, quote 13, he would not establish a foundation. He would distribute his fortune himself, personally researching recipients, making decisions, and supervising execution. The total amount he gave away during his lifetime reached $100 million, equivalent to more than $2 billion in 2025 currency. His largest donations went to the University of Rochester and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1918, he endowed the establishment of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester. In 1921, he funded a school of medicine and dentistry there. In 1922, he founded the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, hiring its first music director, Albert Coates. In 1929, he established the George Eastman Visiting Professorship at Oxford to be held each year by a different American scholar of the highest distinction. He funded dental clinics in Rochester, London, and Stockholm. In 1915, he provided funds for the Eastman Dental Dispensary in Rochester. In 1926, he donated £200,000 to fund a dental clinic in London. The Eastman Dental Institute at University College London opened on November 20th, 1931, in a ceremony attended by the American ambassador and the Minister of Health. Beyond institutions, Eastman pioneered employee benefits. He was one of the first American businessmen to implement profit sharing. In 1919, he gave one-third of his own Kodak stock, then worth $10 million, to his employees. He established retirement annuities, life insurance, and disability benefit plans. After one successful stock offering, he distributed bonuses to 3,000 startled Kodak employees, with notes reading, quote 14, his generosity extended to historically black institutions. He became the largest donor to Hampton Institute and Tuskegee Institute, contributing millions to their educational programs. He maintained a 12-year correspondence with Booker T. Washington. But the generosity contained contradictions. Marion Gleason, a close confidant, later described Eastman's views on African Americans as typical of his time, paternalistic but strictly against social fraternization. While he funded black education generously, he upheld and reinforced the de facto segregation that existed in Rochester. Kodak hired virtually no black employees during Eastman's lifetime. A 1939 commission of the New York State Legislature on living conditions of African Americans found that Kodak had employed exactly one black person. Eastman gave millions to institutions that educated black students. He would not hire them. He funded their advancement in the abstract while excluding them from the concrete reality of employment at his company. The mansion on East Avenue had been built with profits from a company that enriched thousands of white workers and excluded nearly every black applicant. The fortune Eastman distributed so carefully had been made possible by the workers he never hired. The contradiction extended to other areas. Eastman championed education and health care while maintaining strict oversight of how his donations were used. He demanded involvement in decision-making, insisted on high standards, and withdrew support when institutions failed to meet his expectations. His philanthropy was generous but not gentle. He gave on his terms, or not at all. By 1930, the mansion had become a monument to contradictions, and Eastman's body was preparing one final demonstration of will. On March 14, 1932, George Eastman entertained guests at his mansion on East Avenue, signed a codicil to his will, distributed gold coins to the witnesses, waited for everyone to leave, and shot himself through the heart. The end had been approaching for years. In the late 1920s, Eastman was diagnosed with a progressive and irreversible spinal disease. Medical understanding at the time was limited, but the condition was likely lumbar spinal stenosis, a narrowing of the spinal canal caused by calcification in the vertebrae. The narrowing compressed nerves, causing intense pain. Eastman had trouble standing. His walk became a slow shuffle. The man who had bicycled to work through Rochester winters could barely cross a room. The pain was constant. Medication provided limited relief. The diagnosis was clear. The condition would worsen, not improve. Eventually, he would be unable to walk at all. The prospect terrified him. His mother had spent her final 2 years in a wheelchair. Suffering from illness, Eastman had been unable to relieve despite his wealth. He had watched her decline with the helplessness that money could not eliminate. Now he faced the same fate. The fortune that had bought him mastery over every aspect of his life could not prevent his spine from calcifying. The body would betray him, as it had betrayed his mother. Depression followed the pain. Eastman, who had spent his life directing outcomes, confronted an outcome he could not direct. He began putting his affairs in order with the same methodical attention he had applied to building Kodak and constructing his mansion. Monday, March 14, 1932, was an icy winter day in Rochester. The morning began as usual. Organ music filled the conservatory. Eastman dressed and prepared for a meeting. At 11:15, a group from Kodak arrived to witness a codicil to his will. The codicil named the University of Rochester as his main beneficiary, ensuring his remaining fortune would support the institutions he had built. The witnesses included Frank Crouch, an old friend, and several business associates. Eastman helped arrange their chairs. He joked with Crouch as usual. His fountain pen gave him trouble as he started to sign. Crouch suggested he could afford to buy a new one. Eastman reminded him, "You shouldn't kick about that pen. You gave it to me." Eastman signed the codicil. The 3 witnesses followed. They left the room. Alice Whitney Hutchison, Eastman's longtime secretary, entered. It was an old custom of Eastman's to give $10 gold pieces to anyone who witnessed his signature. He distributed the coins. The witnesses departed. Eastman went to his bedroom on the 2nd floor. He wrote a brief note on a piece of yellow-lined paper. The handwriting was steady. The message was 7 words long, though. He abbreviated one with initials. "To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? G.E." He had spent 77 years building Kodak, accumulating wealth, constructing a mansion, establishing institutions, and maintaining absolute precision over every detail of his existence. His final communication contained fewer words than most people use to order coffee. He retrieved a Luger automatic pistol, Some records describe it as a revolver, but contemporary accounts specify a Luger. He positioned himself carefully. Then he fired a single shot through his heart. The staff found him shortly afterward. The note was on a table nearby. The gold pieces were gone, distributed according to custom. The will was signed. Every detail had been managed. The funeral was held at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Rochester. Eastman was cremated. His ashes were buried on the grounds of Kodak Park, now known as Eastman Business Park, on the site of the empire he had created. The death certificate lists the cause as, quote, 18. The designation of temporary insanity was standard for suicide in that era, a legal fiction that allowed burial in consecrated ground and preserved life insurance benefits. Eastman's entire remaining estate, valued at approximately $25 million, went to the University of Rochester as specified in the codicil signed that morning. He had already given away $100 million during his lifetime. What remained was a fraction of what he had accumulated, but still an enormous sum. The university inherited not just money, but also the mansion on East Avenue with its 50 rooms, pipe organ, gardens, greenhouses, barns, and all the property that came with it. The note became one of the most famous suicide notes in American history. The words contain no sentiment, no apology, no explanation beyond the practical. The tone matches Eastman's approach to life, efficient, direct, managed until the end. He had directed every aspect of his life, from the pennies he spent at 14 to the moment he stopped spending them. The mansion on East Avenue had been built to protect him from every disaster his father's death had made imaginable. It could not protect him from becoming what his mother became. The mansion he left behind faced a question. What happens to a house built for a man who never needed anyone? The University of Rochester inherited a problem wrapped in 35,000 square feet of concrete. Eastman's will stipulated that the mansion should serve as the residence for the university president. The gesture seemed generous. The reality was complicated. The house required an enormous staff to operate. 50 rooms needed cleaning, heating, and maintenance. The gardens required constant attention. The greenhouses needed tending. The farm elements had to be managed or abandoned. The technology, state-of-the-art in 1905, now required specialists to repair. The first university president to occupy the mansion was Benjamin Rush Rhys. Eastman and Rhys had worked together closely for years. It had taken 25 years of collaboration before the two men began addressing each other by first names. Eastman's formality extended even to his closest professional relationships. Rhys moved into the mansion with his family and attempted to make it function as a home. The mismatch was immediate. A family occupying a house built for entertaining and solitude found themselves overwhelmed by scale. The conservatory, designed as a breakfast room for one man attended by an organist, served awkwardly as family space. The 50 rooms stretched across 3 floors felt empty even when occupied. The formal gardens, magnificent but demanding, required professional maintenance the university struggled to provide. The second president to occupy the mansion was Allen Valentine. He faced the same challenges Rhys had confronted. The house consumed resources. It demanded attention. It resisted adaptation to normal residential use. What had functioned as George Eastman's precise environment failed as a family home. Interior alterations were made during this period, damaging the historical integrity that would later require restoration. Wallpaper was changed. Furniture was moved or replaced. The organ fell into disrepair, requiring expensive maintenance the university found difficult to justify for a residence. The gardens were simplified, reducing the elaborate plantings to more manageable landscaping. By the mid-1940s, the fundamental problem was clear. The mansion had been designed for one man's specific needs and could not be adapted to serve a different purpose without destroying what made it architecturally and historically significant. The university could continue making compromises that diminished the property, or it could find an alternative use. In 1947, community leaders, university officials, and representatives from Kodak began discussing possibilities. The conversation focused on preservation. The mansion represented something important: Eastman's life, Rochester's industrial heritage, the physical embodiment of early 20th century wealth and innovation. Simply converting it into offices or selling it for demolition seemed wrong. The solution emerged from Eastman's own legacy. He had pioneered popular photography. He had made motion pictures possible. His technological innovations had created entire industries devoted to capturing and preserving images. What if the mansion became a museum dedicated to photography and film? The connection was organic. The building would preserve the man who had made preservation possible. The Board of Regents of New York State chartered George Eastman House Incorporated as an independent, nonprofit educational institution in 1947. The mission was defined clearly: collect, preserve, study, and exhibit photographic and cinematographic art and history. In 1948, the University of Rochester donated the mansion and surrounding property to the newly formed museum. The Colonial Revival structure would be adapted to serve the museum's operations while preserving its historical character. The mansion proved impossible for a family, but would find purpose as a monument. In 1947, the Board of Regents of New York State chartered a new institution that would give the mansion its third life. What Eastman had built to preserve his own independence would become a monument to everyone else's memories. On November 9, 1949, the mansion George Eastman built for isolation opened its doors to the public. The George Eastman House International Museum of Photography and Film became the world's oldest photography museum and one of the world's oldest film archives. The mission focused on collecting, preserving, and presenting the history of photography and cinema. The mansion's former public rooms, where Eastman had entertained Rochester's elite and visiting dignitaries, became exhibition galleries displaying the evolution of image-making technology. The museum's original collections included the Medicus collection of Civil War photographs by Alexander Gardner, Eastman Kodak Company's historical collection documenting the company's innovations, and the massive Gabriel Cromer collection of 19th century French photography. These foundation pieces established the museum's scope: photography as art, as technology, and as historical documentation. Donations followed. Entire archives arrived. Individual photographers bequeathed their life's work. Corporate collections documenting industrial history were transferred. The museum became the destination for anyone seeking to preserve photographic heritage. Motion picture films arrived by the thousands. Cameras, equipment, technical manuals, advertising materials, and ephemera accumulated. For nearly 40 years, the museum displayed objects from its collections in the rooms of Eastman's mansion. The conservatory held exhibitions. The library housed archives. The bedrooms became galleries. The building functioned as both museum and artifact, with visitors touring Eastman's preserved living spaces while viewing photography collections. But success created problems. The collections grew rapidly. By the late 1970s, the museum held hundreds of thousands of photographs, thousands of films, and vast quantities of equipment and documentation. Proper storage required climate oversight, fire suppression, and environmental monitoring that the mansion could not provide without extensive and potentially damaging modification. On May 30, 1978, a two-alarm fire affecting 4 buildings resulted in the loss of some rare movie films and still photographs in the collection. The fire destroyed original negatives to pre-1951 MGM cartoons, though damage was not as extensive as initially feared. The incident highlighted the danger of housing irreplaceable materials in a structure built for residential use, not archival storage. By July 19, 1984, the museum faced a crisis. It carried a $500,000 deficit. The holdings were considered among the world's finest, but the collections were growing at a pace that threatened to overwhelm available space and resources. The museum was increasingly burdened by its own success. Additional storage and study space became critical. In 1985, the Smithsonian Institution made an offer. The Smithsonian would take title and oversight of the museum if the institution agreed to leave the Eastman Archives in Rochester and contribute $1 million per year toward maintenance. The offer represented both opportunity and threat. Smithsonian Authority would provide resources but would also remove local management. The same year, Kodak intervened. The company gave the museum an endowment funded by proceeds from the sale of Kodak's San Francisco office building, worth $13 to $15 million. The gift came with a condition: The museum must remain in Rochester. The trustees must raise matching funds to build or renovate locally. The Kodak endowment made possible what had been desperately needed, a major expansion. Between 1984 and 1989, the museum undertook construction of a 73,000 square foot addition. More than 70% of the new facility was built below ground level to minimize visual impact on the historic property. The addition included climate-controlled collection vaults, exhibition galleries, research libraries, administrative offices, and state-of-the-art photographic conservation and film preservation laboratories. In January 1989, the museum's expansion facility opened to the public. For the first time, the museum had proper storage for its collections. Temperature and humidity could be managed precisely. Nitrate film, which is both historically invaluable and chemically unstable, could be housed safely. Researchers could access materials without damaging them. The museum could finally fulfill its preservation mission adequately. The expansion meant the mansion itself no longer needed to serve as primary exhibition space. The historic rooms could be restored to their appearance during Eastman's lifetime, rather than adapted for museum displays. The building that had protected one man's privacy now preserved everyone's memories. But the mansion itself still waited for its own restoration. In 1987, a group of women led by Georgia Potter Gosnell decided to undo 60 years of damage. With the museum expansion complete, the mansion no longer needed to house collections or serve as primary gallery space. For the first time since 1949, the building could be restored to reflect its appearance during Eastman's residence. The restoration would require undoing changes made during the university president period, researching original finishes and furnishings, and reconstructing interiors based on historical evidence. Gosnell assembled a team, almost entirely of women, to lead the effort. Nancy Turner joined as a principal figure. The group committed to a comprehensive restoration that would return the first floor to its 1910 to 1920 appearance, the period when Eastman lived in the mansion with all his technological innovations installed and the organ fully operational. The project lasted 14 months and cost $2 million. The work began in late 1988 and was completed in January 1990. The restoration team faced a significant challenge, determining exactly what Eastman's mansion had looked like decades earlier. Walls had been repainted, wallpaper had been changed, furniture had been removed, sold, or lost, light fixtures had been replaced. Draperies had disappeared. The solution came from Eastman himself. He had photographed everything. His obsessive documentation of his own life provided the evidence needed to reconstruct it. Eastman had made photographs of virtually every room in the mansion from multiple angles. He had photographed the gardens through different seasons. He had photographed furniture arrangements, table settings, and decorative details. The man who hated publicity had left a comprehensive photographic record of his private life. The restoration team used these photographs as blueprints. They also examined Eastman's correspondence, which contained detailed discussions of furniture purchases, fabric selections, and decorator decisions. Bills and invoices documented specific items. Notes described arrangements. The meticulous records Eastman had kept provided instructions for resurrection. A nationwide search was launched to recover Eastman's original belongings. Many items had been sold or donated after his death. Some had been thought lost or destroyed. Advertisements were placed, collectors were contacted, auctions were monitored. Slowly, pieces returned. More than 85% of the original furnishings were recovered and returned to the mansion. Virtually all decorative interiors on the first floor were restored. Wallpaper was reproduced to match original patterns visible in photographs. Paint colors were matched using chemical analysis of original samples. Wood finishes were replicated. Draperies were reconstructed based on photographic evidence and period textile samples. Light fixtures were restored or reproduced. The Aeolian pipe organ, which had fallen into disrepair, was completely rebuilt to working condition. The restoration extended beyond the mansion itself. Between 1984 and 1992, the gardens underwent comprehensive restoration. The West Garden, Library Garden, Terrace Garden, and Rock Garden were all reconstructed using original plans, historical photographs, correspondence, and invoices. Landscape historians worked with horticulturists to identify plants Eastman had specified and source appropriate replacements. Stephen DeForest's original designs were recovered and studied. The formal symmetry of the terrace garden's 23 beds was restored. The West Garden, designed by architect Claude Bragdon and modeled after the garden at Hestercombe House in England, was replanted according to historical specifications. The Paulmanship sundial that Eastman had added in 1921 was cleaned and reset. The challenge throughout was maintaining authenticity while making the property accessible to visitors. Modern safety systems had to be installed without visible intrusion. Climate management for preservation had to be balanced against historical accuracy. Lighting for tours needed to illuminate without damaging fragile textiles and finishes. The photographs that documented Eastman's life became the instructions for its reconstruction. The man who hated publicity had photographed everything, creating an archive that made exact restoration possible. His need to document and direct extended beyond his death through the images he had compulsively created. By January 1990, visitors could walk into 1920. The conservatory appeared exactly as it had when Eastman ate breakfast while the organ played. The dining room held the same monogrammed china on the same table. The billiard room contained the same billiard table, the same chairs, the same mounted elephant head from Eastman's African safari. The library held books from Eastman's personal collection, arranged on the same shelves. Eastman had managed his life so precisely that even after 60 years, strangers could reassemble it. The mansion became exactly what he would have wanted, a perfect preservation of something that no longer existed. In 1990, visitors could walk into 1920. What they found there raised uncomfortable questions. Today, the mansion at 900 East Avenue welcomes approximately 100,000 visitors annually. The George Eastman Museum operates Tuesday through Sunday. Daily guided tours of the mansion are offered mornings and afternoons. Self-guided tours allow visitors to move through the restored rooms at their own pace, examining Eastman's furniture, reading explanatory materials, and observing details that reveal how a man worth millions chose to live. Live music performances are offered in the mansion most Sunday afternoons throughout the year. The Aeolian pipe organ, fully restored to working condition, is played by visiting organists who demonstrate the instrument's orchestral capabilities. The conservatory fills with the same music that filled it when Eastman ate breakfast there alone. The building resonates the way it was designed to resonate. The gardens open from May through September for daily guided tours, self-guided strolls, and special events. The formal beds bloom with perennials. The West Garden provides a walled English-style retreat. The Rock Garden offers a picturesque destination for walking. Visitors photograph the grounds extensively. The estate has become, according to the museum, quote, 19. The irony is substantial. Eastman built the estate for isolation. It now serves as a backdrop for celebrations of connection. The museum itself, housed in the 73,000 square foot addition built largely underground, maintains world-class collections. The holdings include more than 400,000 photographs and negatives dating from the invention of photography to the present day. 28,000 motion picture films document cinema history. 3 million cinematic objects, including scripts, posters, lobby cards, and stills, provide research materials. More than 16,000 objects of photographic and cinematographic technology trace the evolution of image-making equipment. The 500-seat Dryden Theater shows films daily, screening everything from silent classics to contemporary cinema. The theater hosts the annual Nitrate Picture Show, attracting film enthusiasts from around the world to view rare prints. The museum operates one of only 4 film conservation centers in the United States at the Louis B. Mayer Conservation Center in nearby Chile, housing rare 35mm prints made on cellulose nitrate. In 1996, the museum launched the L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation, the first school in the United States dedicated to teaching restoration, preservation, and archiving of motion pictures. In 1999, the museum established the Mellon Advanced Residency Program in Photograph Conservation, training conservators from around the world. The estate was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1966, one of only 2 in the greater Rochester area. In October 2015, the institution changed its name from George Eastman House to George Eastman Museum, reflecting its dual identity as historic site and world-class museum. The museum's annual budget is approximately $10 million. As of December 2014, its endowment exceeded $35 million, ensuring long-term financial stability. The institution employs dozens of curators, conservators, archivists, educators, and support staff. It has become a leading voice in photography and film preservation, consulted by institutions worldwide. But what draws many visitors is not the museum's collections or its preservation work. They come to see where George Eastman lived and died. They tour the bedroom where his mother spent her final years. They examine the conservatory where he ate breakfast. They view the second floor where a small room, part of exhibitions related to Eastman and Kodak history, displays artifacts from his death. The suicide note is there. Encased in glass, yellow-lined paper, steady handwriting, 6 words visible to anyone who climbs the stairs. Nearby are fragments of his coffin, the codicil to his will signed the morning of his death, his handwritten request to be cremated, his death certificate, dried roses from his coffin blanket, and a program from his funeral service, everything except the gun itself. The display raises questions about what museums preserve and why. Eastman built the mansion to protect his privacy. The museum preserves evidence of his most private moment. Visitors photograph the suicide note, sharing images of Eastman's final words on social media platforms he could never have imagined. The precision he maintained so carefully has dissolved completely. The mansion, once fiercely private, now sells tickets. The rooms designed for solitude host crowds. The building constructed to keep the world at a distance now welcomes it inside. Eastman's home has become the opposite of what he built it to be, and in that transformation, it serves his legacy better than if it had remained what he intended. Visitors photograph themselves in rooms where a man who never smiled taught the world to say cheese. The mansion has survived by becoming the opposite of what it was built to be. The story does not end with preservation. The mansion on East Avenue raises a question more interesting than its architecture. What happens when extraordinary precision meets ordinary mortality? George Eastman's innovations democratized image-making for millions. The Kodak camera made photography accessible to people who would never master wet plates and chemical processes. The Brownie camera put visual documentation in children's hands for $1. Eastman Film made motion pictures possible, creating an entire industry that would shape 20th century culture. He gave the world the ability to capture and preserve moments. But he lived in isolation, photographing rather than connecting. He surrounded himself with the apparatus of relationship, guests, friends, associates, women he traveled with and entertained, while maintaining boundaries that prevented actual intimacy. He built 50 rooms for a family that never existed. He installed an organ designed to fill the house with music, then sat listening to it alone. Eastman gave away $100 million during his lifetime, more than $2 billion in current currency, but he maintained absolute authority over distribution. He researched recipients personally. He made all decisions himself. He refused to establish a foundation that would operate after his death. The giving was generous but not gentle. He helped on his terms or not at all. He pioneered employee benefits, implementing profit sharing and stock options when most industrialists considered workers interchangeable. He distributed bonuses with notes emphasizing that payment was earned, not charity. He established retirement plans and disability benefits, yet his company employed exactly 1 black person by 1939. He gave millions to Tuskegee and Hampton Institutes, while maintaining strict segregation in Rochester. He funded black education in the abstract while excluding black workers from concrete employment. He created technology for capturing joy but could not experience joy himself until he was 40 years old. Even then, the joy was constrained by the same need for precision that governed everything else. Music had to be scheduled. Travel had to be planned. Photography provided distance rather than presence. He captured life without living it. The mansion became a metaphor for all of this. A beautiful exterior protecting emptiness. Concrete that could survive fire. Modern technology ensuring independence. Elaborate gardens requiring constant maintenance. 50 rooms echoing with silence. The pipe organ playing to audiences of 1. What museums preserve is not always what they intend to preserve. The George Eastman Museum preserves cameras, photographs, films, and technology. But the mansion preserves something more uncomfortable. Evidence of what even unlimited wealth cannot protect against. Eastman built his fortune by making preservation possible. He could not preserve himself from the thing his mother suffered. The thing that terrified him more than poverty, or failure, or loss of authority. The mansion documents the cost of precision. Every technological innovation Eastman installed served the goal of independence. The electrical generator meant freedom from relying on the city grid. The telephone system meant communication without leaving rooms. The built-in vacuum meant cleaning, without servants visible in living spaces. The elevator meant movement without stairs. The organ meant music without performers' schedules. Every innovation removed one more dependency on the unreliable world outside the walls. But dependencies cannot be eliminated. Bodies decay, spines calcify, pain cannot be managed away. The fortress built against chaos could not prevent the chaos inside the fortress. The fortune that bought every innovation available in 1905 could not buy the one thing Eastman needed in 1932: a cure for progressive spinal stenosis. Rochester's transformation from Kodak City to post-Kodak City provides context. The company Eastman built dominated the city for a century, employing tens of thousands and funding institutions that made Rochester a center of culture, education, and medical research. Kodak's decline in the digital era devastated the local economy. The company declared bankruptcy in 2012, exactly 80 years after Eastman's death. But the mansion endures. The gardens bloom. The organ plays. Visitors tour rooms where power once resided and now resides only in memory. The building has outlasted the man, outlasted the company, outlasted the certainty that mastery over technology means mastery over fate. What we preserve when we preserve the Eastman Mansion is not celebration of success. It is documentation of the cost of success. The mansion does not honor Eastman's achievements. It witnesses them. The difference matters. The walls that absorbed his morning organ music now absorb flash photography. The conservatory designed for one man's breakfast now hosts wedding receptions. The gardens planned for his solitary enjoyment now provide backdrops for engagement photos. The building has survived by surrendering every characteristic that made it his. Eastman wanted to preserve himself against disaster. Instead, he preserved the evidence of what even a fortune cannot protect against. The mansion stands exactly where Eastman built it, made of the same concrete, wrapped in the same Colonial Revival facade. Nothing has changed except everything. He directed the details but not the meaning. He designed the building but not its future. He created the archive but not its interpretation. The contradiction remains unresolved because it cannot be resolved. Innovation serves humanity while the innovator lives in isolation. Wealth buys precision until precision reveals its limits. Technology preserves moments until the moments reveal their emptiness. The mansion, built to protect one man, now protects the truth about what one man could not protect himself from. On East Avenue in Rochester, the mansion waits. Colonial Revival facade against upstate New York sky. 35,000 square feet to 50 rooms arranged around a two-story conservatory. Reinforced concrete beneath decorative craftsmanship. Built 1902 to 1905 for $335,000 by a man who would give away $100 million and die leaving 6 words. The doors open Tuesday through Sunday. Visitors enter through the same entrance George Eastman used when he returned from Kodak factories, where workers printed photographs for millions of people who would never meet the man who made it possible. The organ plays on Sunday afternoons, filling the conservatory the way it filled it when Eastman sat reading newspapers alone. The gardens bloom May through September, according to plans drawn by Stephen DeForest in 1902. What the mansion reveals about American innovation is this: the men who democratized technology often lived in isolation from what they created. The wealth that built Rochester's institutions came from companies that excluded entire communities. The philanthropy that endowed universities came from fortunes managed with the same rigidity that eventually managed a trigger. George Eastman gave the world the ability to preserve moments. He could not preserve himself from the thing his mother suffered, the thing his father died from, the ultimate loss of authority that bodies impose on will, regardless of wealth. The mansion he built to protect against chaos now protects his memory. Whether that memory is what he would have wanted depends on whether you believe in preserving truth or preserving image. Eastman made an industry of the second. The mansion insists on the first. The building that taught America to smile still stands at 900 East Avenue, the George Eastman Museum. Open Tuesday through Sunday, tours daily. Sunday organ concerts at 3, the gardens accessible May through September. Admission required except for gardens. Photography encouraged. On the second floor, in a small room displaying exhibitions related to George Eastman and Eastman Kodak Company, a piece of yellow-lined paper rests behind glass. Steady handwriting. To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? GE. Still standing.